Kia ora, everyone. My name is Natasha Stillman. I was an advisor with Te Whatu Ara, the Community Equity and Community Engagement group within the Outbreak Response Directive. As such, my specialty is artificial intelligence and equity. In a few months, I'm going to be going to Finland to do research in computational diplomacy and artificial intelligence governance. So I'm really excited about that, and also to be representing Govis while I'm there. So I'll be here. So, yeah, that's pretty exciting. There will be a word cloud questionnaire where you can shuttle your answers, one word or whatever, answers to the following questions. What is your top concern about AI in government? And which value is most crucial for AI governance? So make us a pretty word cloud with all your words. Yeah. What else? No, that's it. We are going to be, this afternoon, exploring the role that digital public infrastructure, DPI, plays in enabling rapid government modernization and stimulating innovation across all sectors, and looking into a number of case studies from around the world, showing the huge impact DPI can deliver in terms of digital and financial inclusion, enhanced user experience, innovation, and multi-billion-dollar savings. Finally, we're going to explore the opportunities Aotearoa New Zealand has to leapfrog many nations in the race to modernize by reusing proven DPI solutions from around the world. So I would like to introduce first, sponsored by AWS, Pete Herlihy, who's going to talk to us about digital public infrastructure, unlocking rapid nation-scale modernization and innovation. Pete is a highly experienced and relentlessly user-centered product manager with a strong technical background. Currently a principal product manager with Amazon Web Services based in New Zealand. Pete has a global responsibility for stimulating the creation and reuse of open-source digital public infrastructure within the public sector and in particular within the Global South. Prior to joining AWS in 2021, Pete was a founding team member of the UK's Government Digital Service, where he worked for over 10 years. Over his time in the UK government, he built and led small, diverse, multidisciplinary product teams to deliver 5 of the UK government's biggest digital successes: gov.uk, petitions, register to vote, gov.uk notify, and emergency alerts, many of which have gone on to be reused by other governments around the world. So please welcome Pete Herlihy.
Thanks, Natasha. There's no timer here, which is good for me and maybe bad for you. But I do see some signs down here saying 5, which I assume is going to come up when I'm running near and not the judge's score on how I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to start with this picture. So this is a plot of land. I'm building a house. This is a true story. I'm building a house on this plot of land, and this is up the Kapiti coast, about an hour north here from Wellington. And there's a big flat green section, and I chose this section because right around the outside, a whole bunch of native planting that's quite mature. So it's quite unusual for sections to have already built up a whole range of native planting. Now, this is about 1 kilometre from the beach, so it's zoned rural, or semi-rural anyway. And that means that when I want to build the house, there's a whole bunch of additional costs that I hadn't really quite appreciated when I signed up for this gig. So there's no water to this property. So when I build this house, I'm going to have to sort out water. Now that means water tanks to collect rainwater from the roof, and when that runs out, paying someone to drive a truck around and fill up the water. So I've got something to drink and something to wash in. So water, not there. Sewage. Unsurprisingly, there's also no sewage. So when I build the house, I also have to build a septic system. Dig it up, put the septic system in, pay for its running costs, and look after that. Additionally, I'm going to have to build stormwater. So this is a trap in the yard, big hole filled with rocks, so that when there's too much rain, the water's got somewhere to go, because this property does not have drainage, gutters, and the other stormwater provisions that you would normally have in a town or a city. And one I had no idea about, firefighting. Do you know you need 45,000 litres of water on standby if there's a fire? I don't know how they got that number. That sounds like a fun job. But you need that kind of water available at all times, dedicated in case there's a fire. Again, there's no fire hydrants on the street to plumb into. So those are 4 quite significant costs that make this project a little bit more expensive, or in fact a lot more expensive than I was envisaging when I set that up. Now, had I bought this section in a residential area, all those services would be provided to the edge of the property. I'd have drinking water available, I'd have a sewage system available, drainage and stormwater, and there'd be fire hydrants in the street nearby, should there be an incident. But because everyone in the built-up areas has the same set of common needs, they all need those things, the council, in their wisdom, or because they're told to, who knows, but they provide that infrastructure, that public infrastructure for me, just to plug into when I need it. And that makes it much cheaper for me as a house owner or house builder. It's much more robust, it's going to be easier to maintain, and it's probably going to be better than what I'm going to get by introducing these kind of additions to the property. So that's physical infrastructure. And from the intro, you'll have no doubt that that's a strong simile. I was going to say metaphor, but I think it's a simile to what digital public infrastructure provides for you. And that's what I want to share a bit about today. So you had the intro. I'm not going to run through that again. I would say I'm a recovering public servant, perhaps. Certainly not reformed, but recovering, with about 20 years or so of public service. So I can show you the scars that I bear later, that I'm sure you all bear from many years in the public service as well. But when I was in the public service, what I was doing, and I didn't know what I was calling it, but at the time we were building digital public infrastructure, and I was based in the United Kingdom at the time. It wasn't called that. The term digital public infrastructure, and I'm just going to say DPI from now onwards because that's quite a lot of words, or quite a lot of syllables. So DPI as a term is only really solidified in the last year or two. The Indian government had the presidency of the G20 last year, and they, as you'll hear a bit more today, they've done a massive play on DPI. And so they kind of introduced the term, brought everyone along, and everyone's kind of settled on a term for something that's actually been around for a lot longer than the name itself. So digital public infrastructure, probably you've heard it under many different guises. And some of those things will refer, perhaps incorrectly or perhaps not fully, in things that are more government infrastructure. And the bit I'm going to focus on today as well is extending that to beyond government infrastructure to public infrastructure. So infrastructure that can be leveraged by society as a whole, not just your interactions with government, not just about making government a bit more efficient. That's definitely a powerful subset of it, but it's not the full story. So a definition here. DPI, describing the foundational digital capabilities that a nation provides to facilitate inclusive, efficient, and secure digital interactions within society. So proving identity, paying for goods and services, proving an entitlement, or sharing data and information. So these are some of the more basic fundamental needs and rights we have as citizens. This is what we need to do to get by in life. It's not all of it, but it's an important part of it. And it's a bit of an academic, wordy description, I'll give you that. But let me give you a slightly different one as how I'd perhaps prefer to frame it. So if you were in charge, if you were Minister Collins for a day, and she's obviously a very busy person, but what digital infrastructure would you put in place to enable both the state and the economy to operate in an inclusive, open, efficient, fair, and frictionless way? And I could put a whole bunch more adjectives in there. This is a subset. But the idea is that if you had you were playing SimCity, for those who are old enough to remember, and you can't, thank you, pick up the SimCity. But what would you do? What would you say? Right, I've got a greenfield situation. What do I want to put in place to make it easy for everything just to happen seamlessly? And I think this is a nice, simple framing for the kind of things we should be considering when we talk about DPI. Okay, so 3 of the most generic words in the English language, right? Put them together, that doesn't sort of help a lot. But I want to talk a little bit about each of them because they do have important context and meaning behind each of the 3 words. You can see my PowerPoint skills are very strong. Okay, underline. So digital's not just software, okay? I know it's very common and easy to go digital. Oh, you mean an app, you mean a website, you mean some software. And yeah, that's a key part of it, but it's not all of it. Included as well, we have data, right? Open data. I think we can appreciate the value of publishing open data and seeing what innovation can happen on it. But we have content as well, right? gov.nz, gov with a t.nz. This is the uniqueness I encountered coming back to New Zealand. These are all powerful public assets that can be used, guidance, legislation, regulation, all these kind of bits of content that are additionally valuable alongside just the data. Models. So we talked a little bit about AI, or particularly sounded like generative AI this morning. So large or small language models, whether they are owned by the government, whether they are public large language models. Small language models, and there's a whole bunch of really powerful, interesting work around preserving languages and giving access to the benefits of generative AI for those languages that are massively underrepresented on the internet, right? All the training information for the large language models come from the internet. What percentage of the internet is English, do we think? High? Low? Yeah, very high, like 90-something%, right? So models are there, and these models can also be other things. They can be machine learning models, digital twins. Can you imagine what fun you'd have with a fully modeled digital twin of your country? You want to dial up something to see what happens to pollution, to climate, to transport, all sorts of fun that could be had with a publicly accessible digital twin of a nation. And standards and specifications. Probably the least sexy, if I'm honest, by sound, but one of the most important. So some of the best digital public infrastructure in the world, DPI, are actually just schemas, frameworks, specifications. They're published and let people come and build on them, build with them. And all you do is setting out the rules that if you want to interact in this way, here's the protocol you need to use. Here's the standard and schema that you need to use. So open banking, good example of that. E-invoicing, really successful effort in New Zealand around e-invoicing. That's not a bit of software you plug into. Now, someone might build one, or some, but the value is unlocked by saying, here's how we're going to do this thing. Here's the format, here's the protocol. The rest of the government and private sector, voluntary sector, can build around that and can innovate on ways we'd never thought of within government. So that's the digital of digital public infrastructure. It is all things digital. They all count. They're all crucial as part of the story. Okay, public. This is the most contentious, perhaps. Let's find out. So I'm being very pragmatic here. There are some really academic definitions of what DPI is, what it should be, what the public aspect and public interest of DPI should be. But this is pragmatism based on working with a lot of governments in this space and what resonates with them, what makes sense. So 2 parts. One, it's provided as a public good and accessible to everyone, all of society. Okay? If I have a digital identity service, right? Random choice. Should I just use that for dealing with government, proving who I am to government? Or should I also be able to use that to prove who I am to a bank or to a mobile phone company, to a power company? The more widespread the use of DPI is, the more value that is unlocked for the economy as a whole, for society as a whole. The other option is that DPI facilitates the provision of public services for all of society. So this is more of the government infrastructure angle, I suppose, I spoke about earlier. I don't want to add another acronym, DGI, if you like, rather than DPI, but it's saying it doesn't just have to be something that is opened up for everyone to use. It can often start, actually, as government infrastructure and later be expanded to wider use. So if you look at over the Tasman at our neighbours, the Australians have digital identity, a whole bunch of them at different levels of government, but just recently have made a decision to open up their digital identity systems and frameworks for public sector use, You just used to be able to just use it to prove who you were to the federal government. They're now saying you can use that same ID and you can go into a bank, building society, whatever it might be. There's also frameworks around identity, and I know we've got the sexily named DISTIF. I'm going to try and remember that. Digital Identity Services Trust Framework. All right. So that's a framework, right? That's for everyone. That's the example of we're just providing the small bit in the middle that says how interactions need to occur, and you're allowing industry, society to build around it and innovate on it in ways that you wouldn't. So that's the working definition I bring with public. And infrastructure, this is just to say it's underlying, it's not the end solution in and of itself. It's the underlying capability that's built once, used many. Well, that is the definition of infrastructure. Okay, so these are all houses out on the beach where I'm building on the left, right? The bottom layer here, that's our septic. Next we've got water. We've got a big soak pit for the stormwater, etc. And on top's the bit that I can uniquely do my own, the house design, right? Now imagine that refers to government services, public services in some way. They've all got a little bit that checks who you are, collects information, sends you some messages, does some processing, and a little bit at the top that's actually unique to that particular service. Yet we have to expend our energy right through that whole stack to come up with public services that work. So if we move from that model, and this is a pretty standard platform play, right? So move from that model to saying, look, what's common? What's undifferentiated? Let's take that, let's set that up somewhere, provision it, either as a platform or reusable code. There are options. But I take away the boring stuff, the dull stuff, and I let you focus on what you are expert in within that domain. And that is the bit that's unique to you, the bit where you can add real value. So you don't have to focus on anything else. So that's the model of a platform play or a digital infrastructure play. Now, these are two of the OGs, I suppose you'd say, of digital public infrastructure. So the internet is a pretty good example, built for everyone to use, to leverage in creative and innovative ways. And the second is GPS. So I'm pretty sure everyone in this room is carrying a GPS device on them. Despite sounding weird, it's true. Now, GPS is a good story because when GPS was first launched, it was the American military, right? And they did it for American military purposes, so you can imagine what they will be. And then in the 80s, Reagan decided that he wanted to open up GPS and make it a public good, right? And so initially that was with commercial airlines. He said GPS is helpful for us guiding our planes and other devices into different countries. Probably going to be quite helpful for our airline industry if they know where all the different planes are in the sky. So you open that up, and then wider use. And it used to be very expensive. No one had a GPS device. They were thousands of dollars just to have one. And now everyone's got them on everything, everywhere, all the time. Okay, so that's a pretty ubiquitous DPI. Still funded by the American government. In fact, the American Space Force, as they sexily call themselves now. But provided for everyone to leverage and benefit from. So these are some of my favorite DPI. So these ones I have direct interactions with the teams, and I'm helping to promote around the world for different governments to adopt, or different countries to adopt. And I'll just run through because I think the range of what they offer is really telling in and of itself. So Pix is a real-time peer-to-peer payments mechanism, platform, out of Brazil. From not existing to having 75% of the population using it as their primary way of paying for things in 2 years. Huge change, very rapid. Again, part framework, part platform. Aadhaar is the Indian biometric digital identity service. 1.3 billion people using it, registered to use it. Huge, huge program, huge enabler for societal change. All of a sudden, people that were off the grid completely, financially excluded, not participating in society, not participating in their formal economy, now can prove who they are. They can start to access things like credit they never could before. It's a game changer in a nation like India. GovUK Notify, I have to put that one up because that was my baby, one of my babies. And that's a general messaging platform that's used by pretty much the entire UK public sector. Local government, central government, healthcare. And it does the unsexy stuff, right? It sends emails, it sends text messages, it sends letters. Letters are still a thing, right? You need to meet people where they are. And sometimes they need a letter. Sometimes they're legally required to have a letter. So some of the more innovative work actually on that was making it very cheap, easy, and efficient to send letters, freeing up other resources and money and time that could be done for other things. So that's 8,500 service teams around the UK using that one small platform. And we'll come onto some of the economics of these DPI and these platforms in a moment. Form.sg, this is the Singapore government. And I should say, pretty much everything on here is open source. Okay, and that's going to be part of the story here. I know there's a lot of open source fans here. Big up you. And we'll share a bit more about what that means next. The next one is DIA. This is the Ukrainian state in a smartphone, as they call it. Hugely powerful and beneficial for them during the war. Remains to be, where people very instantly access money to repair buildings, money for funding, all sorts of critical services that they would otherwise have a real trouble in a time of turmoil within the country. W3C, I don't think we need to sell that to this group of people, but that's a huge DPI, right? There's all the standards you need just to be a good human, pretty much, are there. X-Road, this is a data exchange layer out of Estonia initially, and now more the Nordics are kind of running the show on that. But that's a very powerful mechanism for allowing data exchange right across government and across society in a kind of discoverability way, where you can go, right, I want to exchange, tell me what I need, what's the schema, great, thanks, here's the information. INGI, digital credentialing stack, wallets, digital credentials, verifiable credentials. I think I saw there's a talk on that later, so I don't want to steal the thunder on that. But that is the bee's knees. The ability to do digital credentialing, to prove who you are, prove entitlements, gain access to things digitally is amazing. It's going to be, I think, a game changer. And the use cases for that are just out there, right? A GP gives you a prescription as a credential on your phone. You walk over and use it. You can have pay slips paid to your digital credentials on your phone, your educational attainment. Access and entitlement to anything can be proved irrefutably. So we'll come back to that as part of the story, I think, that New Zealand has coming up. And the US web design system, right? The web design system is a powerful bit of DPI. It takes away the undifferentiated lifting and lets you know what good looks like, because there's thousands and thousands of hours of user research, iteration, trial and error that's gone into saying this is actually what a really good way of interacting with people on the web is. So you don't have to learn that whole set of things over and over again. Okay, so why? It's good, right? But big some numbers. I know Minister Collins talked about GDP, and she talked about productivity. So a nation's DPI can contribute more than 1% value compared to its GDP. Now, New Zealand's GDP, who knows what New Zealand's GDP is? Bad humans. Right, so I'm telling on you. So New Zealand's GDP is $250 billion a year. Okay, so 1% of 250 billion is 2.5 billion. Good. This is good. So I think these are incredibly conservative. These are almost direct benefits. And if you start looking at what the indirect benefits are, the numbers can multiply by 2, 3, or 4 is what we see around the world. India, I mentioned, one of the pioneers of the DPI play. They reckon they save at least $52 billion a year through their DPI initiatives. Now, that's a big country, very big country. It's also a very poor country in many parts, right? So it doesn't have the same GDP per capita, for example, that New Zealand does, again, as the minister mentioned. Estonia, much smaller, way smaller than Auckland even. Imagine that. Now, they serve 800 years of working time a year, which is a strange thing to say out loud. But that's about productivity, right? How much time and money that small country saves, around 2% of its GDP, just through the use of DPI. GovUK Notify, This is really talking about how one small component within a wider DPI ecosystem can in itself unlock massive benefits. So this is one platform, pretty well adopted, delivering about 76 million in savings. I got the 5-minute warning. But that's, to give you a clue, that is something like $1 to $2 million a year spend to run this platform, and it unlocks what I think now is more up north of $100 million a year in savings. Okay, so what are the most commonly needed capabilities within government? Now, this is just focusing on the government aspect of this, okay? We talked about some of them are wider. This is just the government one. So when I was in government digital service in the UK, we did this massive piece of user research, 150 service teams from right across government. All sizes, they were randomly chosen deliberately to ensure we had some big dogs, some small dogs, some medium dogs, and some goats. So we had a bit of everything, and the most common functions within the services that needed to offer was this list here. Okay, so publishing information, so website, content management, verifying who you are, collecting data from citizens and businesses, collecting money for citizens and businesses, sending messages, exchanging information, and it's kind of more behind the scenes. Once you collect information, you want to pass that information to multiple agencies, and then issuing something, a credential, a certificate, a license, whatever it might be. Those are the most common, and I've been to many, many countries and looked at what they need and what they have. It's the same list. Unsurprisingly, these are the most foundational needs within digital government. So if we go back to that drawing of the platforms and the different services along the top, we can see here that not every service will need everything within that, right? You might not need to prove who someone is in order to issue them a new recycling bin, right? Or whatever it might be. So we need to figure out what they need, and we need to say, well, if we have these things provided, then we are probably accounting for about 80% or 90% of government interactions, right? Just imagine all the services you look after. How many of them could you describe just with these components? Now, this place, who's been here recently? Hands up. Yeah, everyone. Good stuff. I don't mean to pick on Waka Kotahi, but I did recently have to go there. And this is a whole bunch of forms that are available on paper and only on paper, right? Now, that's not truly the case for all things, but many times a lot of the services have to be filled in on paper. And you go online to find it, and the form is a PDF that you download and fill in, right? It's still paper. Now, this is common anywhere, every country, every level of government. This was a temporary driving license. Now, this is 2024. This was earlier this year. This is a small bit of paper, about yay big. I'm sure who's had one of these recently? Yeah, whoa, everyone. Okay, it's a small bit of paper, handwritten. I have to carry in my wallet, otherwise I'm not allowed to drive my car. And it's 2024, right? So there are ways, and I know there's a lot of work going on to make that not the case, but it is the case. And it's the case in many countries around the world, many levels of government. Okay, so the kicker, right? These problems are common in New Zealand, in all levels of New Zealand government, in all countries. Right? There's a few exceptions, but generally these are common problems. And the solutions to the problems are common as well. Now, we've always grown up, those of us who worked in technology or near technology have always had that build versus buy discussion, right? I'm going to start a new thing. Do I build it? Do I buy it? Okay. But I think the narrative changes now. It needs to change. So we move into one where, do I reuse or do I build or do I buy? Because it makes no sense if somebody else has already solved all these problems for me to start again and rebuild. That's a waste of taxpayers' money. Nobody benefits from that. And you're actually putting yourself back several years because it's going to take you that long to get to where the other people have got to already. So we need to stop being so precious about not made here, not made by me, because that's not doing the taxpayers and our citizens any favours. And we know there are many, many case studies of reuse. This is notified. This is being reused by about 7 different countries around the world. MOSIP, digital identity open source service out of India, it's being reused in a bunch of countries, and increasingly so. And X-Road, I mentioned, 30 different nations have reused this information data exchange layer. So it's proven. The model works. This is not some random experiment. Let's see if it works. We know it works. And here's some numbers just to wind this down. When we built GovUK Notify, we spent about 3 years getting to a point at which point the Australian government came along and said, hey, we like that. We'd like to reuse that code for Australia. So we had a team of 10, and we'd spent roughly about $4.5 million in total building and operating the platform to that point, iterating, making it great, all those things. The Australians came along, 8 weeks, 4 people, and 160K. They got exactly where we were, 8 weeks. So the value proposition of reusing, you talk about ROI, absolutely stunning figures that can be got. And I should say, importantly, this is not just about government. I know the examples of focusing a little on government infrastructure, but DPI actually benefits the entirety of society. When you launch a DPI, let's say the payments in India, they have a payments platform of which all of society can use. Innovation, startups happen, markets emerge around this infrastructure that you hadn't envisaged. I know we all know the story with data, how that happens, but it happens with public infrastructure as well. Some companies become multi-billion-dollar companies because they're leveraging the publicly provided infrastructure and doing value add on top of it. So it's a play for the public sector, but it's also a massive play for innovation in the private sector as well. And this is probably the godfather, I guess, in my eyes anyway, of digital public infrastructure, Nandan Nilekani out of India, who kind of spearheaded lots of the work in India. And he's a great phrase. He always talks about that it's not an expensive play to do digital public infrastructure. It's not. And it's even less so when you consider you reuse much of what's been done before. But it needs deep conviction. You need people who are willing to take a punt, who get the big picture, and prepared to take those kind of investments. That is an email address. You've probably seen those before. If you would like to talk more about DPI, because I've had the 5 minutes, I didn't know there was a 2-minute one they also hand up. I want to see what happens if I keep going. But please hit me up if you want to hear what's happening in other countries, if you've got things you're looking at doing here and you want to get some support, some data, some evidence to back you up. Or if there's something you've seen abroad you want to have a look at and think about implementing in New Zealand, please hit me up and I'll see how I can help you. Thanks for your time. I just want to say 29 minutes, 34 seconds. So.
Do we have questions? Okay. There we go. Okay. So, gov.uk services are amazing and so simple to use. NSW has nailed it with their digital interactions. What is New Zealand doing right or wrong?
Sweet, nice easy one.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think New Zealand, and I've followed New Zealand very closely. I'm a Kiwi, I'm from New Zealand. I've followed it whilst I've been living abroad and I've come back. And I think New Zealand government makes all the right sounds about what it's trying to do, but it's a thin layer of implementation. And I think what it's lacked is that conviction that I'm going to actually take a punt and be disruptive and maybe upset some people, maybe annoy some of these silos and departmental sovereignty silos that we have. And this is not a common New Zealand problem, but it is definitely ingrained in New Zealand at the moment. So I think you look at the strategy and what the minister's saying, the things are there, right? Platform play, making a more modern, joined-up experience of government, digitising government. They're all the things that DPI enables. And in most of the countries that we would consider like nations around the world, that's precisely what they've done. So I'm slightly biased because it's the topic of my talk, but I think that the lack of widespread DPI in New Zealand is holding it back massively in digital government. No, but I think there's less disruptive people who are willing to break the comfort zones of people, frankly. Do I get one more?
Yes, you can get one more.
They're on here if you want to see them.
Yep. How about what are they doing for those who can't afford mobile data?
What are they doing for? I'm not sure kind of who they are in this situation, but we should be clear that the digital is one of the channels, right? It is often the primary channel, it's often the most preferred channel. But like I said about letters, there's always going to be those who are not going to engage on those routes for whatever reason. We can't leave them behind. We definitely cannot leave them behind. You know, private sector can decide we'll deal with 99%. That's cool. We're happy. Government doesn't have that luxury. So I think digital public infrastructure, if anything, frees you up and frees the resources and time up so you can better focus on meeting those needs of those people in ways that you wouldn't otherwise afford to be able to do. In person, going out to see them, roving vans that turn up in rural areas, things like this. So I think it's not so much that this solves their problem or excludes them, it actually frees up the system to better be able to meet their needs. And there are also free programs for mobile data on Gov sites as well.
Do we have a question from the audience? Anyone who couldn't access Slido? No? No, we're good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
From us? Yeah.